The review of that constitution is an idea whose time has come. And anybody trying to oppose it, either directly or indirectly, is wasting their time. And anybody trying to throw spanners in the works is going to blame themselves in the fullness of time. The irreducible minimum, as we go to the referendum, is the creation of a prime minister's position to help us dilute the powers of the president. We must ensure that power is effectively diffused and is effectively shared. That will only happen once we create the office of the prime minister. What we want is to reform the executive.
Ruto thinks that you cannot hold a referendum, you cannot do a census, and you cannot do an elections in a period of 3 years. Those three things can be done in 3 years. So long as we have money, and money, we have now found out where the money was going. So we are going to do those three things by the year 2022. And I'm sure Raila Amolo Odinga is going to be in the leadership of this country together with those who stand for democracy.
And you're watching The Big Story. Thank you for staying with us. We have Dr. Lutalala Mukhwana, who's a political analyst. We also have Jared Okello, who's the Nyando Member of Parliament. Mheshimiwa Okello, thank you for staying with me. So let me get to your quick reaction on the solutions that were being given by Deputy President William Ruto at that speech at Chatham House. And I was having a conversation earlier on with Dr. Lutalala. He says politicians should be the last people to even have a conversation on whether or not Kenya needs a referendum. And as we are having the issue of referendum, the question is it a necessity in the first place? Mheshimiwa, can you hear me? Jared Okello, can you hear me? All right.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Now I can, not before.
Ah, great. So I was just picking your mind a little bit on what Deputy President William Ruto had to say. So before we took the break, I was speaking to a political analyst who's in studio with me called Lutalala. And Lutalala was alluding to the fact that maybe the conversation we should be having is why do we even need a referendum, not whether or not the country can afford to have a referendum, a census, and a general election in under 4 years. And politicians should be the last people to even have a conversation about referendum. What are your thoughts?
Well, Linda, I can't hear you properly, but I know the subject pertains to the referendum quest and the issues that were paraded by the Deputy President while in Chatham House in London. First things first, well, thank you for inviting me, and secondly, I can see you are rebranding, so we can now deal with a new Linda. The Deputy President, as a matter of fact, has been blowing hot and cold over this subject on the referendum, speaking from two sides of his mouth. And it is true that certain times he's for the referendum, certain times he's not for the referendum, and uses all the machinery within his disposal to thwart the efforts. It is true again that the BBI, the Building Bridges Initiative, is still collecting views from the Kenyan populace, views that they will collate and hence inform the referendum debate. So it will be too early in the day to start discounting issues around the referendum debate. But, you know, certain proposals have been advanced by Kenyans, some of which include expansion of the executive. Kenyans believe, and, you know, we can take a tangent from what happened in the year 2010. We all universally agreed that 20% of the current constitution had issues that ought to have been handled. And I remember the same Deputy President moving across the country punched holes on that element of 20%, of course, together with the clergy, the religious leaders who were also equally opposed to the referendum quest of the year 2010. Today, we are confronted with the same issues, and we are saying that it is high time we addressed those fundamental concerns that permeated our quest to have a new constitutional dispensation in 2010. Even though the constitution passed as it was presented to Kenyans then, we still accepted that there are certain pitfalls that must be addressed in good time. And we are saying that time is now. And the issue to do with the expansion of the executive is just one of it. The other element that we are looking at is Kenya overrepresented? What is the rationale behind the establishment of the 47 women special seats in the assembly? We are looking at the effectiveness of the Senate in Parliament. We are looking at the ballooned representation at the counties, the members of county assemblies. So it transcends just the executive itself, where we would want to put a lot of focus, because one of the reasons why Kenyans quickly embraced a new constitution then was because the executive, which was the presidency, was viewed as a body that did not have checks and balances. And they had so much excess powers that they could do anything, anytime to anyone. So we thought, therefore, that there needed to be caveats on enjoyment of those powers that are donated by Kenyan people. And to a larger degree, you can see, even now, that to a large extent, the powers of the president has been clipped. And we are saying, is that enough? We are saying not enough yet. We remember what happened after the 2007-2008 presidential election that triggered violence and occasioned deaths of so many Kenyans. After that, we know that we came up with a hybrid system where we had the Prime Minister and the President, and for the first time in the history of this country, that is viewed to this very day as having been the success of this Kenyan, in terms of political front, in terms of economic endowment, in terms of social engagements by the Kenyan people. So we are saying that this, having been tested and tried by Kenyans, and Kenyan economy skyrocketed to gigantomous levels, is it time that we stepped back and embraced this kind of system? I think that is what the BBI will be presenting to Kenyans.
Okay.
The question about the costs that are involved, and whether this country is in a position to embrace a referendum and a census and many other things, we are saying the costs ought not to present difficulties for the Kenyan people. I remember when the Supreme Court, in their own wisdom, nullified the presidential elections last year, the cost was never a consideration at all. But it was an argument that was advanced by Jubilee Party at the Supreme Court.
Okay.
But you remember that the quest to have electoral purity overrides any other consideration. So when Kenyans are yearning to have a constitution that works for them, the cost is never a consideration at all. Money will be found.
Hold on. So
yeah,
from
well,
where you sit,
that's a good question to ask. From where? Yeah,
no, from
so
where
go
you
ahead.
sit, first of all, money should not be a consideration. Let me pick your mind, though. You're saying BBI, we all know, is going round the entire country, just trying to get the sentiments of Kenyans. The Deputy President, in his own right, is also a Kenyan, allowed to give his opinion on which way this referendum should go. Looking at the solutions that the Deputy President gave with respect to the official opposition and the leader of the party, which comes in second, becomes the leader of the opposition with the running mate, and they automatically become members of parliament, basically just saying we need to have a government that is inclusive. Look at the solutions that William Ruto gave in London. Do they make sense?
Well, I don't speak for Jubilee, but it is increasingly evident that the Deputy President is isolated by the politics of the country at the moment. Each time the President has spoken so unequivocally about the need to step back on matters politics, discussions around 2022, and he has continued to do that unabated. And that is why the President, in his wisdom, chose to have Dr. Fred Matiang'i to chair
Jared,
the committee comprising of
Mheshimiwa.
cabinet secretaries on issues development. I'm coming to your question.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, with that kind of isolation, which is increasing, you see the former Prime Minister, Right Honorable Raila Odinga, has joined hands with Uhuru Kenyatta. Kalonzo Musyoka has joined the fray. Mudavadi is in. And if you have this team coming together to support a new referendum, whoever is on the other side of the aisle is bound to lose. Now, having taken cognizance of this, and William Ruto is not a stupid person, he's very sharp. He understands the political terrain. So from the look of things, if the marriage that is in the offing is anything to go by, getting into 2022, and he takes a different tangent as he's agitating, then definitely he's going to be shoved by the wayside. He's going to join the opposition. In his wisdom, therefore, he's saying, even though I will be in the opposition, let me create myself a position already that I automatically get nominated to parliament automatically, and then I champion the interest of the opposition or the minority, as the new constitution puts it, from parliament. And he's also going ahead to say that the deputy president will then be moving into parliament to represent government business and champion its interests. So this is a person who is trying to angle himself not to be taken into political oblivion post-2022. So he's actually speaking for himself, Linda.
Okay. Dr. Lutalala, what are your thoughts? I mean, Deputy President is giving his sentiments like any other Kenyan. Mheshimiwa seems to think he's trying to make sure he's covered. But look at the solution that he was given. Does it make sense at all? Is there anything good out of what he said that Kenyans can pick and say, okay, fine, we don't agree with 50%, but we agree with these other 50? I mean, or do you just condemn it in its entirety because it came from William Ruto?
Thanks, Linda. I do not know why we have this tendency to want to support a cause that has been taken by these two leaders, Honorable Kenyatta and Honorable Raila. And therefore now the debate, which even the media houses seem to be leading, is not whether a referendum is necessary in the first place, but rather when and how. Now, I have said that is a wrong paradigm. And look, in management, when you want to change a system, there is what everybody now knows, which is called the SWOT analysis.
Yes.
This is pedestrian. A first-year student will know that there is something called a SWOT analysis. And the problem I have with our politicians, Linda, with the greatest respect to Mheshimiwa Jared and others, is that they have taken this mentality that they are God's gift to Kenyans and that everything they want must hold sway. The first thing that the politicians ought to have done is to tell us, yes, they're saying 20% of the Katiba was agreeable from the onset, that is wrong, which is William Ruto actually said that time. But this 80%, we are not being told what is wrong with the 80% and how much of this 80% has been implemented, and whether it is not sufficient that we should build on the 80% and not take the country through the trouble of looking for the 20%. Take, for example, we have a constitution that is fairly democratic, that talks about devolution. Why is devolution failing? Is it because we don't have a prime minister? That's why devolution is failing? That is just one question, but there are many others. And I don't want to appear like I'm lecturing anybody. But in my view, the issue of referendum is misplaced in the first place. Number two, William Ruto is right in the position he's taking. Because what is happening now, the very onset of the referendum debate is choreographed by the handshake twins. The very entry of Honorable Raila in government, I said here before, that what we have may not be an Usumkate government, because that's not the name, but Honorable Raila is right in government. And so, Honorable Ruto has seen red lights. So when he recommends that we should have a president and a deputy president who runs the business of government, he is proposing a self-survival strategy. When he recommends that the runners-up of the presidential candidates, meaning the winner becomes the president, the deputy of the winner leads government business, and then the loser, for lack of a better word, becomes the leader of official opposition. Honorable Ruto is trying to deflect the threat that he's staring at, which is the creation of a prime minister with executive powers. When Honorable Ruto and Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta agreed on Kumi, Ruto knew he'll have the trappings of an executive presidency. And therefore, what Ruto is proposing cannot be faulted. After all, what Mheshimiwa is saying, and what I hear Honorable Pio Wandai and Council Orengo are doing, they have basically found their place behind one partner of the handshake, and they are also propagating a self-survival strategy. That in the event that the Prime Minister's position is created, and remember, Linda, the sad thing is this, that when you talk about the creation of the Prime Minister, it appears that it's already determined that is Honorable Raila Odinga, which is wrong. We should not be talking of creation of positions with particular persons in mind. That is what is fueling the disagreement, and that is why even the William Ruto supporters cannot take anything coming from politicians about referendum positively. Okay. In my view, what William Ruto is suggesting is self-survival. And what is wrong with that? After all, what Orengo and Opio are suggesting is also self-survival. And so the politicians are taking us down the drain again. And come 2022, it may be worse than what you have seen. Yeah, because the politicians have arrogated themselves this thing that they are God's gift to Kenyans, and therefore what they want, it must be. Yeah. I do not think so.
And now it makes a lot of sense when you say, I mean, this conversation should not even be had with politicians in the first place. Mheshimiwa Okello, you get the final word in this conversation. Which way out of this whole conversation? Is this a conversation we should be having in the first place? Is there a way to depoliticize it so that we have an honest conversation about the changes that Kenyans need in the Constitution? You have a minute, sir.
Well, thank you. Firstly, I didn't know that the Prof was coming to hold brief for one Mr. William Samoei Ruto. If I knew, I would have taken a different direction.
How I wish.
That is one. Number two, it is true that the new constitutional dispensation has brought in lots of tidings to this country. Hitherto, we did not have devolution, where monies are sent to counties to propagate development agenda. We did not have the Bill of Rights that has guaranteed each and every Kenyan fundamental and an unfettered enjoyment of those fundamental rights, unless they are gagged by a court of law, as is stated in the Constitution. We do have lots and lots of many things that have come with the new Constitution. The new independent commissions that also try to help midwife government activities to the general citizenry. So we cannot say that there is absolutely nothing, as Prof would want us to believe, that the new constitution hasn't brought into force. It is quite fundamental, Linda, also, that he's claiming, wrongfully so, that when you talk about the premier position, then you interlink that with Raila Odinga. Firstly, since the last elections and the handshake that followed, the Prime Minister hasn't come out to say whether he's going to run for any political position in 2022. He has not. Okay. William Ruto has always been all over the place talking about 2022. So you cannot therefore mislead the country that the referendum quest is about Raila Odinga or is about Uhuru Kenyatta or Mudavadi or Kalonzo Musyoka. No, it is for the common interest of the Kenyan people, not an individual.
I need to wrap this up, Mheshimiwa. Thank you so much for speaking to us, for being part of the big story this evening. Mheshimiwa Jared Okello, Member of Parliament, Nyando. We also had Dr. Lutalala Mukhwana, who's a political analyst. Thank you, sir, for your time. I wish I could give you the right of reply. I cannot. I do not have the time. And a big thank you as well to Kimani Ichung'wah, who's the Kikuyu Member of Parliament. Thank you as well for watching The Big Story. I'm Linda Ogutu, and this conversation focused on the referendum. I'd like us to take a look at what Mutula Kilonzo Jr. had to say on the same. There we go. To have an inclusive government does not need a referendum. It is the creation of new executive posts that require the voice of Kenyans. And that is how we wrap up The Big Story this evening. Have a good evening.